Welcome to Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Dr. Albert C. Johnston. What family secret was he hiding? Stories of passing have been prevalent throughout the history of the United States. Each one has its pain and loss. Scholars have historically paid far more attention to what was gained by those passing as white than what was lost by those who rejected their black racial identity. Albert C. Johnston was a doctor living in Keene, New Hampshire during the 1940s. His family's story became the subject of a book and a Hollywood movie about race in America. Dr. Johnston, along with his family, were living their lives passing as white. Born in Chicago, Illinois in the year 1900, Albert Johnston grew up in a time when discrimination against black families was common. Chicago was quickly becoming a city where many black families moved to escape segregation and violence of the southern states. Albert's family had moved there from Mississippi. Albert was a light-skinned African American and grew up knowing he wanted to be a doctor. After completing high school, he attended the University of Chicago Medical School in the 1920s. He was one of 2 black students accepted into the medical college. While studying, Albert met and then married Thyra Baumann, whose family had moved to Chicago from New Orleans, Louisiana. The Johnstons had no thought of passing until their 1924 marriage, when he was a pre-med student at the University of Chicago. Things changed when he tried to find work as an intern. Hospitals that accepted black interns were full, and other hospitals would not accept him because he was part black. This was very frustrating to Albert, who wanted a job helping people. After several attempts, at last, Maine General Hospital in Portland, Maine, accepted Johnston without asking his race. It was the first time that someone hadn't asked him that question. He and his wife decided to keep their race a secret so he wouldn't lose this job. For years, they kept his secret from everyone, even their 4 children. Dr. and Mrs. Johnston were one of many African American couples in the mid-20th century who had made the difficult decision to pass as white. In 1929, his internship over, the family moved to Gorham, New Hampshire, and Johnston went into a successful private practice. The family moved to Boston in 1937 so Johnston could study radiology at Harvard Medical School. In 1939, he relocated his family to Keene, New Hampshire. New Hampshire was one of the few states to not use Jim Crow laws, but at the same time, black families were still being discriminated against. Dr. Johnston and Thyra didn't want their children to be treated any differently than others in Keene. They decided to let their children grow up thinking that they were white. It was a very difficult decision for them because it meant that they would have to stop visiting their relatives. It meant that the children would never know their grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. It meant dwelling with the loneliness of living in a new place without family. The Johnston family soon fell in love with their new hometown, making many friends. Dr. Johnston became Keene's first radiologist. It was there, just before World War II, that the truth came out. When World War II broke out, the U.S. military needed doctors to help care for soldiers. Albert was accepted into the U.S. Navy as a medical officer. But when the Navy later discovered that Dr. Johnston was actually part black, they changed their minds. He had volunteered for the Navy and won a lieutenant commander's commission in July. But a few days after, a Navy intelligence officer visited the doctor and said, "We understand that you have colored blood in your veins." About a month later, he was notified that his commission had been revoked because of his inability to meet naval physical requirements. At the time that Dr. Johnston was trying to join the war effort, the Navy was the only branch of the military that was still segregated. The U.S. government did not want a black officer in charge of white soldiers. The doctor was rejected by the Navy, and when word got around, the hospital he worked for fired him too. After his disheartening rejection from the Navy, Dr. and Mrs. Johnston chose to expose their race to their friends and children. Each one of the 4 children handled their new identities in different ways as they grew up. Albert Jr., the eldest of their 4 children, left home to go on a journey across the country to find himself. For the first time, he visited his black aunts, uncles, and cousins. He met black lawyers, doctors, and film actors. He began to learn more about himself as a young black man. He began to gain confidence about his future. Albert Jr. returned home and entered the University of New Hampshire to become a music composer, a writer of music. One day, he and some friends visited a famous Hollywood producer who had just moved to New Hampshire. During the meeting, Albert Jr. shared what had happened to his father during the war. The film producer was very interested. He asked the Johnston family if he could share their story. In 1948, the family story became a famous book, and in 1949, it became a Hollywood movie called Lost Boundaries. Suddenly, the family secret was out. The filmmakers worried that the movie would cause some people to get mad at the Johnstons for lying about their race. To protect them, the filmmakers changed the name of the movie characters to the Carter family. They also changed the name of the town to Keene, New Hampshire. Except for supporting cast members, white actors were used for the film. Lost Boundaries became one of the top 10 films of 1949. It won an award as one of the first movies to talk about race in America. Suddenly, Dr. and Mrs. Johnston's secret was news all over the country. The movie was banned in many southern states, such as Atlanta and Memphis. The Johnstons worried that they would lose their friends. However, to their surprise, most of the people in Keene supported the family. People from all around the country wrote to them to share their own experiences with racial passing and with racism. During the 1950s, Dr. Johnston and Albert Jr. traveled and gave speeches in hopes of helping to end discrimination against Black Americans. 3 years after the release of Lost Boundaries, Dr. Johnston was fired from his job as radiologist at Keene Community Hospital. The president of the hospital board told reporters that racial prejudice was not the reason for his dismissal, but the doctor believed otherwise. The Johnston family moved from New Hampshire in 1966 and moved permanently to Honolulu, Hawaii. Dr. Johnston died in 1988 and Thyra Johnston in 1995. He is remembered for being a wonderful doctor and a brave man for sharing his family story. A mural honoring Dr. Johnston was put up in downtown Keene, New Hampshire. Until next time, if you like little-known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.